Welcome to the Your Courageous Life podcast, where we explore what it really means to transform fear, burnout, and perfectionism with the practice of courage. I'm Kate, author of the books 100% Fully Alive and The Courage Habit, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and head of the CLCC Coach Training Program at TeamCLCC.com. If you're someone who feels deeply, thinks critically, and wants to stay grounded in a world that can feel like too much, then this is the podcast for you. Learn evidence-based and heart-centered tools to practice courage so that who you are on the inside becomes how you live, lead, and show up on the outside. And now, let's get into today's episode. Hey, girly pop. Quick podcast poll. Anybody else's teenage daughter saying that to them these days? Greeting them that way? Hey, girly pop. Hey, bestie. It's weird. It's completely weird. Hi, I'm Kate. Let's talk about life. And today, let's talk about science-backed ways to achieve your goals. And before you scroll, let me make sure that anybody who's new to this podcast knows that, I'm not a fan of the bro podcasters who are like, just set your goal and put your mind to it. Okay? I'm not a fan. I am a fan of goal setting. I'm a believer that most people who hesitate around goal setting don't actually hesitate because they have a problem with goal setting. They hesitate because they have not followed through on doing things in the past. And so goal setting starts to feel kind of icky and kind of uncomfortable. But if you could actually learn the science behind achieving your goals, it would probably feel a lot better because you would have more success at it. And are goals the be-all, end-all of life? No, of course not. Of course not. I tell you, my saying about being online in any capacity is that the internet is unmatched in lacking the ability to grasp nuance or apply critical thinking. So you say something like, hey, let's talk about how to set a goal. And somebody's like, that's not what life is all about. Yes, I'm aware. Got it. I don't think that's what life is all about either. That's not what my life is all about. That's not what my clients' lives are all about. All that. So let's get into it because I want to go deep on goal achievement and actually go beyond the motivational rah-rah and get into the science, the research, what psychologists and behavioral scientists have actually found about why some people achieve their goals, others don't, and then you get to choose what you want to do differently based on that evidence. And I'm going to start with a brief confession because I think it'll resonate. Part of this confession, eldest daughter of an eldest daughter. So there's confession number one, and that's going to start setting you up for where this is going to go. Parentified eldest daughter, okay, expected to be more mature for my age than I actually was all throughout childhood, expected to be mature and responsible and hardworking. And then also for the people who swing this way, Sagittarius with 5 placements in Virgo. It's the 5 placements in Virgo part that for the astrology buffs, they're going to be going, oh, okay. I had this lovely astrology friend of mine tell me, I think 15 years ago, that Sagittariuses that have that many placements in Virgo, the way she put it was, you're the get shit done powerhouses of the zodiac. And I was like, ooh, I like that. So I think I've put it in a couple places. I tell that anecdote sometimes. It's just so fun. So let me get into that now. My approach to achieving anything for a really long time in my life was want it badly enough, work hard enough, push through hard enough, grit and willpower, just keep going. And here's the thing about that. It works until it doesn't. It worked until I hit walls that willpower alone couldn't move, or even worse, really, I'd achieve the goal and feel strangely empty. So many of my private coaching clients have heard me say this and describe this in various ways over the years. And they tell me that's the thing that had me go to your yourcourageouslife.com website and click on life coaching and go, I need to talk to her. Because I gotta say, I deeply understand what it is like to feel wired for ambition on some level, and yet at the same time know that there's gotta be something more meaningful here, because if simply achieving goals felt so great, that emptiness would not be there. And then, of course, I've also had experience with burnout, and I'm not talking about kind of the pop psychology burnout where people are like, oh my God, I'm so burned out. I'm talking about actual clinical burnout. So we're going to get into that today. Okay. And some of the research I'm going to talk about today ties to habit formation and the psychology of behavior change. This is research that shaped the writing of my book, The Courage Habit. And my book, The Courage Habit, is really about habit formation as it applies to self-doubt, fear patterns, getting out of habitual ways of responding to fear and getting stuck in those patterns and moving into creating courage as a habit. And at the same time, though, today I'm going to be talking about how you can apply these strategies, this science, to your goals. And I would say doing the research for my book, The Courage Habit, was part of how I understood why the willpower approach is so unreliable and what actually works much better. So this episode will be a distillation of that research, and we're going to move through a couple of evidence-based frameworks. Love the opportunity to nerd out. Girly pop, let's nerd out together. And with each one, I'm going to give a concrete action step, because talking about theoretical research and going, here's what the research says, and then not actually taking it and applying it to life, not as helpful. And at the end, I'm going to summarize everything so you can walk away with a clear picture. So let's get into it. First things first, I want to start at the beginning. Before we talk about how to pursue a goal, let's talk about how to set a goal. Because it's possible that you have been setting goals in a way that research suggests works against you. So we've got these two people, Edwin Locke, Locke, and Gary Latham, Latham. And they've got a goal setting theory, which they've developed over decades of research, and they summarized in a paper called Building a Practically Useful Theory of Goal Setting and Task Motivation. And they found that the most effective goals share two characteristics. They are specific and they are challenging. This might be why when you tell yourself, I'm going to set a goal to get healthier, I'm going to set a goal to be more present. Maybe you have a creative longing. I just did an episode on how to find time for creativity. Maybe you have a goal like, I want to write more. That produces vague results. Vague goals will produce vague results. And it's not because you don't care. It's because your brain needs to know what to aim at. Specificity really gives your brain a target, and challenge matters because goals that are too easy don't activate the same level of engagement and persistence. Now, personally, I love a BHAG. I think that's such a silly acronym. It makes me laugh. BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's an acronym. So when I set out, for instance, to do my first ever triathlon, the goal was to do a half Ironman, and then the sprint level, the shorter distance triathlons were like the lead up to that. I'm just more motivated by the one that seems kind of like, how the hell would I ever do that? So I think that Locke and Latham are onto something, okay? Got to be specific, and a challenge needs to be sort of dangled in front of you that's intriguing. A little bit of a, how would I pull that off? I think I could pull it off, maybe, or I don't know how I'd pull that off, but I'm very intrigued. But here's the nuance that I think often gets left out of the SMART goals conversation. Commitment. Locke and Latham found this in their research. The commitment to the goal really matters. So if you have a specific goal and you have a challenging goal, but you don't actually care about it, then it's not going to work either. The goal has to mean something to you and has to connect to something real. And so if I go to this triathlon example that I gave, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the backstory about why that meant so much to me. I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And like so many people, unfortunately, who get diagnosed with autoimmune diseases, I went to my doctor and I'm going, hey, why does this happen? I think I'm a pretty healthy person, I do all these things for my life. Why would I? And they're just like, we don't know. We don't know. Great, fantastic, love it when doctors just go, we don't know, and that's it. And by the way, then of course, being the person that I am, I spent quite a bit of time on PubMed, which has a lot of free, clinically reviewed, clinical, evidence-based, peer-reviewed research articles. And that's where I get my citations essentially for these episodes. And there's actually a lot of theory about why people have autoimmune disease diagnoses. So I don't know why the people with the medical degrees who spend decades studying to, be a doctor just kind of shrug their shoulders whenever these things are brought to them. It's pretty frustrating, but it happens. And so maybe you'll hear this and go, that's happened to me too. I want to spend some time on PubMed. And since I don't dispense medical advice, I'm not a doctor. I'm going to say you go to PubMed rather than me sharing what I found, but you'll probably find some good stuff on PubMed. So nonetheless, my whole thing about doing this triathlon really became about, fuck it, like this autoimmune diagnosis, I am not going to let doctors tell me that I won't be healthy, that it's just a downward spiral, that I can't control the symptoms. No, I'm not doing that. And so yeah, I guess I'm just a little stubborn. I decided to do a half Ironman. Then I went and did another one. And then I decided that having the part-time job of training for a triathlon was not for me. And then I moved over to CrossFit, which is appropriately hard, but not a part-time job. So here's an action step you can take, all right? Take something that you desire, something you'd like to make into a goal. Make sure that it is written out to be both specific and genuinely challenging. And then here's the question I thought of for you to check in with yourself. Really ask yourself honestly, do I actually want this, or do I think I should want it? Like really do a gut check with yourself, because if the answer is the latter, that's important information. There are people who think that they should want things that actually it's like what other people are doing. It's what their parents expected of them. There's a lot of things that motivate people. And sometimes the thing we think is what is our motivation isn't necessarily actually what's motivating us. And the research suggests that you'll struggle to sustain motivation towards a goal that isn't authentically yours. So, next thing, you're going to use mental contrasting. And this one might really surprise you. It goes against a lot of what we've been told about positive thinking. Now, these are all just theories, right? Like there's no one ultimate truth. Try these out today as you hear these different options. Take what you like, leave the rest, right? That's always, you're always the one in choice. So Gabriele Oettingen, and that is spelled Oettingen, is a psychology professor at New York University. And they have spent decades studying the relationship between optimism and actual goal achievement. There's this book that she wrote called Rethinking Positive Thinking, and it found something counterintuitive. People who purely visualize the positive outcome, everything going right, without also mentally engaging with the obstacles, actually achieve their goals less often. People who do both, who do the positive outcome visualization and they think through what's an obstacle that might come up for me and how would I, and visualizing themselves moving through it, more successful. Now, pure positive visualization feels good. I am a visualization baddie. I do it because I think it is a psychologically healthy thing to do. But if that's all you do, Oettingen's research shows it can trick your brain into this kind of premature satisfaction as if the goal is already accomplished, and then that can reduce the motivation to pursue it. Now, again, I'm a visualization baddie. So seeing something through as the goal being accomplished, I don't think the research is saying, don't do that. The research is saying, do that, and also, if you encounter an obstacle, visualize the possible obstacles and how you will overcome them. So the research is not saying, be negative, take down the vibe. The research is saying that it's actually really powerful to visualize the outcome you want and also visualize yourself successfully moving through the obstacles on the way to the outcome you want. And she has a framework that she calls WOOP, W-O-O-P, Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. So you identify the wish, you identify the outcome, the best outcome, you identify the most significant internal obstacle that could get in your way, the fear, the self-doubt, and then you make a specific plan for how you're going to respond when that obstacle shows up. And she calls it mental contrasting. It's been tested across a lot of studies, and it outperforms just positive thinking, and it also outperforms just obstacle-focused visualization. So an action step you could take here, what is something you deeply want? Do you want to start a business? Do you want to write a book? Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to have a baby? Do you want to change your relationship, find your person, improve your marriage, get along better with your coworkers, redecorate your house, learn a new language? What a gift it is to be human and have so many different things you can potentially experience in the world. So whatever it is you want, what's your wish? What's your outcome? The best possible outcome? What's the obstacle? An internal obstacle that might get in your way? And what's your plan? If that obstacle shows up, what will you do? And writing it down. The research actually suggests that the act of writing this out increases follow through. And I had not known about this framework before I started doing research for this episode. And one thing that I think is really interesting is that I have a whole framework that I use around planning my business for the year. And it's one of my favorite things to do at this point. It almost feels like casting witchy spells and manifesting. I sit down towards the end of a literal calendar year, sometime in December, and I start plotting out what I want for the year ahead. And I plot what I want for the end of the year, and then I work backwards in quarters. And I think about these things, actually. I go, okay, what's the most likely obstacle? And I look at things like, where am I most likely to experience resistance? And I create habits around those. So, for instance, one of my habits around, I'm not going to tell you which business task it is, but there is a business task that I need to do every single week. It has nothing to do with coaching clients. That is not the resistance. It's an administrative behind the scenes task. And I just don't really like to do it. I don't know why. So what I've started to do as a habit is I just make that the first thing that I get off of my list. Because then I feel freed up and I don't have this thing hanging over my head of like, oh, now I have to do this thing. So I will just say that is a habit that's really helped. And I feel like, here's where I'm trying to go with this. As I've been planning out my year, I've actually visualized myself before confronting the obstacle of going, I don't really want to do this. And then just doing it. And I gotta say, it helps. And granted, this is just my own anecdote, but I think it helps. All right, next thing. Let's talk about motivation. Not all motivation is created equal. That's kind of a weird statement, but we're going to unpack that a bit, because understanding the difference might be one of the most practically useful things you could take from this episode. There are these psychologists at the University of Rochester, Edward Deci, I think it is Deci, D-E-C-I, and Richard Ryan, R-Y-A-N. And they developed self-determination theory over several decades. You've probably heard of some pieces of what I'm about to say, and maybe not necessarily applied it to your life. 1985 book on intrinsic motivation and self-determination in human behavior. This has been extensively peer-reviewed, and there are two fundamentally different types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic, I-N, is how that starts. Extrinsic, E-X, is how that one starts. Intrinsic motivation comes from genuine interest, enjoyment, or personal meaning. Extrinsic motivation comes from external rewards or pressures, money, approval, avoiding punishment, trying to look good to other people. Research consistently shows intrinsic motivation produces much better outcomes. If you are intrinsically motivated to persist longer, you will perform at a higher quality. You will experience more well-being in the process. You are more likely to sustain behavior over time. Extrinsic motivation does work in the short term, but it tends to undermine intrinsic motivation actually when it takes over. And in fact, they call this the undermining effect. And so I want to take this to the example of a goal. So maybe you're like, okay, I need to get healthy, okay? It is intrinsically motivating for you to decide that you want to get healthy because you want to be someone who follows through on best practices and commitments to yourself. That might sound really nerdy to some people, but I will just share for myself that there were many years where I was extrinsically motivated around working out. I wanted my body to look a certain way. I felt like it was like, hot girl workout situation. I mean, these are embarrassing things to admit to in some ways, but hey, we've all been 25, okay? And now in my 40s, my working out is about, I want to feel good in my body. I want to be someone who does what I say I'm going to do. I do CrossFit, weightlifting, running. I want to be a badass. I love being able to lift a heavy barbell over my head and then drop the barbell and it crashes on the gym floor. It's such a good feeling. That has nothing to do with anybody else. That is purely intrinsic motivation. And another switch that has been highly motivating for me is watching my father, who I love dearly, in his marginal decade, and seeing how he's never been someone who worked out, but I would say he was always reasonably active up until a certain point. He'd take walks or he'd be tinkering with something around the house and stuff like that. But the fact that in his 80s now, it's hard for him to just get up and down out of a chair, seeing how that limits his mobility, seeing the ways in which I'm needing to take responsibility for aspects of his care because he can't. That it's really motivating to me now to work out and go, I don't want my daughter to go through that. This is something I can actually have some impact over. So if you are struggling with something like eating well, being healthy, stopping smoking, exercising, and it's because something in you just can't quite get it together to do it, check and see if there's extrinsic motivation at play, because it might not be very motivating. But if you have kids, if you don't want to end up like my dad is essentially ending up, which is, I'm not even going to get into the details, but I'm going to tell you right now, it is not pretty, not at all. And he hates it. He hates the loss of independence. It's so challenging for him, understandably. If you don't want to end up in those places, then it needs to be intrinsic motivation. This is about who I am. I do what I say I'm going to do. I don't lie to myself. I don't betray myself. I step up. I'm going to follow the protocol of eating reasonably well and getting a certain amount of exercise because that's just what it's going to take to make sure that I'm healthy. Another thing about this is that Deci and Ryan also found that 3 psychological needs underlie intrinsic motivation. One is autonomy, or the sense that you're choosing this goal freely. Another is competence, the sense that you're capable of making progress. And it makes sense that if you feel like you're doing something and just can't make any progress, that would be really demotivating over time. And relatedness, feeling connected to others in the pursuit of your goal. One of the things I really enjoy about being in a CrossFit class is that my personal results are always about me. I love doing CrossFit as a methodology. I'm not great at it at all. I have to scale the workouts down. I can't lift as heavy as other people, stuff like that. But there is a community vibe. I'm always in charge of my own results and choices. And at the same time, there's community around. So that just makes it more fun than, say, doing it at home in my garage. I could do it at home in my garage, but it's just more fun to connect with other people. When any of these three needs is chronically unmet, they found that motivation tends to falter. And so think of this as creating the psychological infrastructure for you to be able to meet a goal. It's not you're lazy. It's not you lack discipline. It's like, how do you set yourself up for success? So if you're going to take this to the level of an action step, look at any goal you're struggling to stay motivated around. Fitness, eating well, those are two that are high on most people's lists. And so ask yourself, what is my motivation for doing this? And if you find that your motivation is external, shift into a more personal reason for wanting it. Consider even if it's actually your goal at all. And check the three needs. Do you feel autonomous in how you're pursuing it? Do you feel competent, like you're making progress? And are you connected to anyone else in this pursuit? And to tie this just another notch further, I would say that I shared this anecdote earlier about triathlon as a response where it became personally meaningful to me to do a triathlon as this kind of like autoimmune disease diagnosis. No, I'm not doing this. I'm still healthy. At the end of the day, I felt I did not feel autonomous training for triathlon. It is like having a part-time job. It really and truly. I mean, it is. It's just constantly like, if my swim was okay, my bike and my run sucked. If I was running enough, I wasn't swimming or biking enough. It didn't work for me. So I didn't feel autonomous. I felt like I had to constantly kind of catch up with training. Competent, I did feel competent. Connected to anyone else, a lot of the training was alone. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And then, of course, people were out there on race day. But again, you're like out there doing the triathlon on your own, right? Like you're not swimming right next to someone and it's like you're all in it together. I would say CrossFit ticks more of those boxes. And I think the reason I moved away from triathlon to CrossFit is because of that. Here's the TLDR. If you feel like any exercise fitness plan doesn't work for you, just keep moving around until you find the thing that does, right? Like the thing that doesn't feel so hard to push through. All right, let's get into another piece. This is about changing your identity and not just your behavior. Now, this one, I love how it bridges research and practical application. And how are we going to talk about habits without referencing the one and only James Clear? So James Clear, his book, Atomic Habits. If you haven't heard of it, go Google it, Atomic. Great book, bestseller, every language probably at this point. And that book draws on behavioral science research and argues that the most durable behavior change does not actually start with outcomes or processes. It starts with identity. The question isn't how do I achieve this goal, but who is the person, the kind of person who achieves this goal? Am I becoming that person? And he cites research on habit formation, drawing on work by a social psychologist named Wendy, who did research on habits, again, published across numerous peer-reviewed journals. She wrote a book called Good Habits, Bad Habits. And approximately 43% of our daily behaviors are performed habitually, so without conscious decision-making. That makes sense, right? Like you probably brush your teeth at a certain time every morning. That is habitual. It's probably like the same order. But if we draw back a little bit, what this could mean is that if your habits aren't aligned with your goals, and if your habits aren't aligned with your identity, then you might be kind of working against yourself. So let me break that down a little bit more. So the identity-based approach works like this. Instead of saying, I want to write a novel, you would say, I'm a writer. I want to be a writer. If I'm going to be a writer, I got to write. You may not write a novel, but you got to at least write. Instead of, I want to run a marathon, you say, I want to be a runner. So if you say, I want to be a writer, I want to be a runner, then you got to ask, well, what would a writer be doing today? What would a runner be doing this morning? If you want to run a business, this is an example I drop a lot because a lot of people who follow me want to run businesses. And so I like putting that example in. And it's also something tied to how I operate. You want to run a business, you're going to have to ask yourself, what do I need to be doing to run this business? And James Clear calls all the small actions that are consistent with the identity you're building a vote for that identity. Over time, he says the evidence of who you're becoming solidifies that identity. So the behavior becomes who you are, not just what you're trying to do. And I would say Atomic Habits had not come out at the time that this shifted for me personally. But when I look back and reflect on how I moved from push through, willpower, just keep going, to a shift to building small daily habits, absolutely, this was consistent with who I was becoming. It's what I just talked about with that last example, or a couple examples ago, of the autoimmune disease not being an identity and deciding this is my identity instead. I'm an athlete. I'm somebody who is really, really healthy. And so you stop relying on willpower, you start relying on systems. And of course, if you want to explore the fear and self-doubt angle of things, that's courage habit. But if you want to get into the strategy, you got to look at your systems. So here's an action step you could take. Pick one goal and reframe it as an identity statement. And then identify a tiny daily action, something that takes 5 minutes or less, maybe 10, that's consistent with that identity. And then commit to doing it every day this week. Now, this is really important. You're not trying to achieve the goal in a week. You're casting votes through these tiny little actions that create the person, the kind of person who does. Next, let's get into a little more habit formation and how that helps you to achieve goals. Because the cue, routine, reward loop from Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit, that was a book that really influenced everything. And I would say habit formation changed my life. I was interviewed for a number of podcasts when The Courage Habit was first published, and that was something I said frequently. The habit formation, understanding the research behind it, and the cue, routine, reward loop changed my life. It changed it changed how I put my toddler to bed. At the time, my daughter was a toddler. And let me tell you something. Wrangling a toddler to bed is not for the faint of heart. Oh, I applied habit formation to this. She went to bed like a charm. Like it saved everything. So Charles Duhigg, Duhigg, he wrote this book called The Power of Habit, and it draws on neuroscience research, including work conducted at MIT. And he explains that habits operate through a 3-part loop: cue, routine, reward. The cue triggers the behavior. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is what your brain gets out of it. And that's what makes the loop self-reinforcing over time. Now, in the courage habit, I talk about this and I say, look, the cue triggers the behavior. Fearful things that arouse your self-doubt, are going to happen. The routine that most people fall into is a fear routine, a patterned fear-based response to that routine that is designed to get you the reward, which is what your brain gets out of it. And people go, what do you mean? What reward? Well, if you're triggered by self-doubt, and that's a cue, and you go into a perfectionist fear routine, The reward is I get to feel a little more in control amid my discomfort. If your cue is self-doubt and your dominant fear routine is people-pleasing, you might say to yourself, well, people-pleasing sucks. I don't like that. Well, on some level you do. The reward is I feel a little less stimulated, dysregulated, nervous when people approve of me. And that's why that loop gets self-reinforcing over time. So that's why you got to interrupt at the level of the routine. You can interrupt at any of these places. You can try to eliminate cues from your environment. Helpful. You can't do it perfectly because life is gonna life. You could dangle a really enticing reward in front of yourself, and that might help you change the habit. I always say the routine is the place where you really got to change the habit. And Duhigg's book gets into the neuroscience behind this, which involves the basal ganglia, a part of the brain involved in procedural learning and habit formation. And research shows that as behaviors become more habitual, the brain basically automates them. So it requires less conscious effort. And that's why an established habit just feels effortless and building a new one feels hard, because you're asking your brain to essentially be a project manager to manage something that it hasn't yet automated. So Duhigg's key insight for goal achievement is that you can design your habits deliberately by engineering the cue routine reward loop. So you could try to choose a cue, like a consistent trigger that will reliably precede the behavior you want to build. So something like I always put, I keep coming up with fitness examples today apparently, but I always put my gym clothes next to the door so that I don't forget them on my way out the door. And that's the thing that reminds me like, yep, I'm going to the gym. You could define the routine. That's the specific behavior. You could identify a genuine reward, like something your brain actually finds satisfying, something that you enjoy. When I'm at the gym, I'm going to listen to my favorite podcast. The cue, to whatever degree you can shift them, will be helpful to look at because it can remove the need for willpower, and you're not deciding each day, will I or won't I do the thing? If you always go to the gym at 4:00 in the afternoon on your way home from work every single day, then like, boom, it just becomes like automatic. The routine, I think, is the thing to look at the most. What is it that you're doing and how do you really make it so that the routine is something you are just really committed to? The reward, again, yes, you could also engineer this, make it really attractive to do the thing you said you were going to do so that you'll follow through. Here's your action step. Choose a habit that you want to build that would lead you to your goal. So identify something that is an existing cue, something that already happens reliably, like making coffee, finishing lunch, a certain time of day, getting into bed, and attach your new routine to that cue. And then identify a specific reward you'll give yourself immediately after, and really focus on the routine being the thing that is going to move you closer to the goal, and notice where fear-based routines come in that might sidetrack you from the goal. All right, next thing. We cannot talk about goal achievement without talking about Carol Dweck, Dweck. This is mindset research. She is a professor of psychology at Stanford. She spent her career studying what she calls implicit theories of intelligence. And that's essentially what people believe about their abilities. Are your abilities fixed and you're born with this and that's what you get? Or are they changeable? Can you enhance your ability? To what degree can you enhance your ability? And she's written a classic book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. This has also been published extensively, her research in peer-reviewed journals. And what it really finds is that there are two fundamental orientations. There's the fixed mindset, which is, hey, you get what you get. You're born with what you're born with. This is the capacity and ability that you have, and it's not going to go beyond that. And the growth mindset, which holds that abilities can be developed through effort and learning. You can grow. And the implications for goal achievement are significant. A lot of people operate from a fixed mindset. That's just how I am. That's just how I was raised. That's just how my family is. Well, I've just been taught to believe that for so long. It's like you'll talk to someone about how they might change or shift and they'll go, well, but I'm just not that kind of person. I hear this a lot around introversion. Well, but I'm an introvert, so I'm uncomfortable on social media. Girl, I'm an introvert too. I love my alone time. But you can learn how to be on social media in a way that works for you. I do not spend a lot of time on social media. You might not believe this because you see things on social media, but I don't. And I don't think to this date I've ever done like one of those dancing videos. I would feel so weird doing that. But like other people love it. And I actually totally love it when other people do that. I love their joy. Great. So happy that you're dancing. But this whole, I'm just not the kind of person who, stop it. Why would you do that to yourself? Bestie, girly pop. Why would you do that to yourself? Right? Because actually people operating from a fixed mindset, you tend to avoid challenges that might expose your limitations. You tend to give up more easily when you encounter a setback. You tend to interpret failure as evidence of incapacity that is just inherent to who you are, that doesn't feel good, and it's actually not true. By contrast, people operating from a growth mindset tend to embrace challenges as opportunities to develop. They tend to persist even when the shit hits the fan. They tend to interpret failure as information rather than a verdict. So this is important because mindset is not something you're born with. Mindset is a lens that can be shifted. And that shift can start with something as simple as how you talk to yourself. When you say, I'm just not the kind of person who, what are you closing off to? If you say to yourself, I can't do this, that's very different than I can't do this yet. That single word yet reflects a growth orientation, and it has been shown in Dweck's research to meaningfully affect persistence and outcome. So here's your action step, okay? Pay attention to the language you use when you hit a wall with a goal, when you're having trouble with motivation, trouble getting started. Notice if you're telling yourself, I'm not good at this. This just isn't for me. I'm not the kind of person who. I'll never be able to. And reframe it. And I'm not talking about reframing in a way where you like throw glitter on poop and try to pretend that you don't have challenges or obstacles. I'm talking about just like the example I just gave. I'm not good at this yet. I haven't figured this out yet. I'm still learning how to do this. And it sounds so small and so simple, but the research suggests that it isn't. Last, don't go it alone. There's actually science to show that social accountability can help. So social accountability and the research on that paired with goal achievement actually consistently shows that we can be more likely to follow through on things when we're accountable to someone else. Now, there's a slight difference to this. I have also seen research that says that when you go around telling everyone your goal, you might actually be demotivated to pursue the goal. And I think that is because your brain gets a little hit of dopamine from telling people that you're going after a goal. But this is about accountability. So there was a study by the American Society of Training and Development, and it found that people who commit to an accountability appointment with another person have a 95% chance of completing their goal. 95%. That's kind of bananas. Charles Duhigg's book also found that to be the truth as well. I have the paperback copy of The Power of Habit, and on page 89, Duhigg writes, when people join groups where change seems possible, the potential for that change to occur becomes more real. For most people who overhaul their lives, there are no seminal moments or life-altering disasters. There are simply communities, sometimes of just one other person, who make change believable. In the courage habit, there are 4 parts to the courage habit, and the 4th one is reach out and create community, and it was born of this research. that social accountability helps. So we get into Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which we talked about earlier, also speaks to this. Relatedness, the sense of connection to others. It's one of the 3 core psychological needs that underlies sustained motivation. And if you're only pursuing your goals in isolation, I wouldn't go so far as to say you won't succeed. Certainly, people pursue goals in isolation, but there's an innate human need, I think, for connection. So putting yourself in an environment where people are invested in your success will help you. I think it's one of the reasons why coaching helps people. Everybody understands that an athlete out on the field needs the support of a coach. Even like if you're a swimmer and you're not doing it as a team, you need the support of a coach. The coach is able to see bigger picture things, help you reframe setbacks and disappointments, help you to recognize self-defeating patterns that you might not really be fully conscious to. And that's all in athletic coaching, but it also translates to life coaching as well. So you can get a coach, you could get an accountability partner, you could tell a trusted person, here's what I'm working towards and I need you to check in with me. So this social contract changes the game, and that is the action step. You want to be accountable to another person, not just say, oh, I'm planning to do this thing. Ask if they would be willing to check in with you on it and schedule the check-in, because that conversation will meaningfully increase your odds. All right, let's bring it all together, okay? If you want to actually achieve your goals, actually achieve them, not just intend to, here's what the research tells us works. 1, goals need to be specific and challenging and genuinely yours. Vague goals produce vague results. 2, don't just visualize the best outcome. Do that plus the most likely internal obstacle so that you have a specific, if this happens, then I do this plan. 3, make sure you're intrinsically motivated. Pursue something because it genuinely matters to you. And if it does not genuinely matter to you currently, look at how it could genuinely matter to you. Like, I get it. If you don't like working out and you feel like it's totally an externalized goal, but you know that working out is going to be better for your health, find someone important in your life who you don't want to be charged with having to put diapers on you when you're 80 because you can't go to the bathroom by yourself. That should be pretty motivating, right? It's intrinsically motivating to you to not put that burden on other people. It's intrinsically motivating to you to become the kind of person who can set themselves up to be as healthy as possible. 4th, build an identity, not just a behavior. I think the work on habits and how to align your habits with who you're becoming, not just ticking a to-do list item of achievement, is really compelling. 5, think about that cue, routine, reward loop. You're probably not going to eliminate all the negative cues in your life that trigger you or make you feel like, I don't like this. And sometimes you can't always engineer a reward that is big enough to motivate you, but you can always choose the routine in the middle. Don't rely on willpower every single day. Try to automate some of this. 6th, growth mindset. How do you talk to yourself? Because the research shows that how you talk to yourself meaningfully affects your persistence, your outcomes. And last, don't go it alone. If you talk about your goals, that is different than being accountable as you talk to your goals. So schedule that check-in, create social contracts, essentially. So that's the science. Now go do the thing. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Before you go, would you take just one moment to give a rating in whatever podcast app you're listening in right now? It's a tiny action that helps to get this podcast out to more people. And I've got more for you. You can get access to free resources, audios, worksheets, and more for practicing courage in your everyday life. Head over to yourcourageouslife.com and become a subscriber, and you'll get access to an entire library of free courageous resources. And if you've ever thought about becoming a coach, or if you want to bring deeper presence and purpose to your work life so that corporate job doesn't feel quite so soul-sucking, check out the CLCC Coach Training Program at teamclcc.com. Thank you again for listening, and I hope that whatever today brings, you meet it with courage.